funny. I was sharing with someone the other day that I always start the podcast the exact same way. It's like, introduce yourself. Why did you decide to write this book? And I'm just really trying hard to get away from that. And yet it just feels like a natural thing to talk about here at the beginning of the episode. So I
Sure.
will slightly have you introduce yourself and share that. But I also want to get to a quote that you said, and maybe this will help introduce you. You say, art chose me long before I chose it. So I want to
Hmm.
start with that and let's get you introduced through that.
Okay, that sounds great. You want me to just like go for it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, all
Put you
right.
on the spot.
Yeah. Sorry, father of four here with a new baby, and I'm a little slow on the uptake this morning.
No, you're totally fine. Good again, just that I really like the quote that you write in or that you state in your book. Art chose me long before I chose that. So obviously I'm talking to an artist, but why don't you go into a little bit more of your story and then we'll get to how the book started.
Yeah. What I mean by that, what I mean by art chose me long before I chose it, is because, for years it was my favorite pastime, oldest friend, and it was like a constant companion for me as a kid. And yet all the while I sort of overlooked it. I never thought that it was something that was going to be what I would do long term. And I was even discouraged by some, like, who said, like, don't try and make a living as an artist. You don't want to kill your passion that way. Making a living as an artist is very hard. Everybody's heard of the starving artist. So for me, it was, in a lot of ways, it was like I was betraying this deep love of mine for years and years, until I finally, kind of gave myself over to it. And that's where the Lord was ultimately leading me.
Yeah, no, that's so good. So this book is a little bit different. I'll let you share why you think it's different from your typical, I don't know, like memoir and or I don't know. I guess I think of it as an art book if you're just going through it because you choose to show like your work that is not completed. You show the process throughout. So I'm butchering what you've done. Your book is absolutely lovely. I'll let you share a little bit more about it.
Okay, yeah. This book, the way that I was really encouraged to approach it by, he was my editor, and became like a dear friend. He was actually connected to me. It was sort of like out of house, and it was introduced through another editor with my publisher, who said, like, I really think, this guy Steve Watts, you two would get on like a house on fire, because here he is, he's this professor of medieval history up in Canada, and he's like, you have this really like old world like love, and so I think you guys would just get along really well. And so in our first conversation, as he's looked over my first manuscript, he says, Jake, where your writing really comes to life is when you're talking about your deep personal stories. And so he's like, the way I want you to frame it is very much like St. Augustine framed his Confessions. Because you had St. Augustine, here he was the head of rhetoric in the church in Milan. He was incredibly like well respected, had a lot of like notoriety and fame, but he wrote this book that was incredibly transparent, that was very vulnerable, especially considering the place that he was in. And so my editor, Steve, said, I want you to lean into that vulnerability. The root word of vulnerability is vulnus, meaning to wound. And so he says, to your reader, it shows that you have a willingness to be wounded and to bear your wounds before them. And so for me, it was a big stretch, I would say, because it was like, I didn't want it to be, the Jake show. I didn't want this book to just be a glorification of everything that I've done in sort of memoir fashion. I wanted the reader to have something for them to really take away, and apply to their own life. And there's lots of that in there that really encourages the reader. It sort of turns it back to them and saying, have you ever been in this place where you've struggled with imposter syndrome or feelings of insecurity? And so hopefully it's something that really connects with people, and that was my goal. And so a lot with it to kind of as you said, it is like it's an art book as well.
Mhm.
And that was like I had to wear essentially two hats in this process. The first was, of course, to actually write the book and tell my story and the story behind these stories with as it kind of highlights, 10 major art pieces throughout the book. So once I wrote the book, then it was time to sort of to become the artist again, which is a much more comfortable hat for me. And so I was, not only designing the cover, but all of the interior as well, as far as like how it laid out in the book. I worked with a whole design team at Thomas Nelson, and the first draft that they sent to me, I was like, it's too clean. I want, all the pictures were neatly justified within the text, but it was all my hero shots of like finished pieces. And I was like, I'm inviting the reader in to come behind the scenes, to enter through the back door of my studio. And so in that way, I wanted to show like sketches bleeding off the page where you can see all of my eraser marks. And as I've rethought my drawing process in earlier drafts, and then also have like, I was going around the house to all my different studios. I have like a different studio for each medium that I do. And so I was pulling different tools to take pictures. So you see the tools on the page. And so in that way, it's this feeling like you're in it with me. You're in the work. You're seeing the tools of the trade. You're seeing the rough start to the finished product. And so hopefully, that sets the tone throughout the book of this tone of vulnerability, of transparency and authenticity.
It does. It's just such a unique, it's so beautiful, but it's such a unique book. So I want to congratulate you. It's just so well done. But I want to talk about
Thank you.
you. Absolutely. I want to talk about you as the artist. I've never interviewed an artist, I don't think. I'm sorry if I have, and I'm forgetting. But what are you thinking about as you're sitting down? Obviously, this is going to be more of a faith tilted podcast episode. I don't even think we said the name of the book. It's Old Soul, New Creation. Where are you getting your motivation from as this is coming out of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually ties in a lot to the title of the book. A lot of my inspiration is taken from the old world, whether it's old truths or lasting beauty, finding the same way that the Renaissance artists used to go about composing a picture, and even creating this armature to their composition that tells a story, and it's all based on the golden ratio. It's like there's this deep underlying truths that as I became an artist and as I studied art history, it just drew me into that, to like this really long lasting depth and truth that undergirded the beauty. And so it seems that every single one of the art forms that I practice is an old and sometimes dying, if not lost, art form. I do wood carving and calligraphy and hand engraving, and so all of these are very old analog forms of artwork. So that really shows, like, that brings in the old soul aspect of my work. But I don't believe that you honor the past by repeating it. I think you honor the past by bringing it forward and giving it life and relevance in a modern age. And so for that, it's like I'm taking all of these old truths and old art forms, but making a new creation of them. And that's the power of being, an artist of my day. And hopefully I'm creating work that, while it is new, it is going to be lasting. And then on the spiritual side, it's like you take it and here I am, this old soul with this love for lasting truths. And in the process of creating, God has made a new creation of me. And so that title has this beautiful double meaning to both the work and the worker, the artist.
Absolutely. This is just a curious conversation to be having tonight because I just posted earlier today, and actually it was my minimalist moment. You're probably not familiar that I do a minimalist moment for minimalist moms, but
No, but I like that.
Yeah, do a minimalist moment and or a minimalist resource. But today I posted, humans were designed to create. This is why you get depressed when all you do is consume. And just this idea of creation and what that may look like. It could be cooking, it could be like DIY, it could be photography. I mean, it really doesn't have to necessarily be an art to be art in a sense, but just this idea,
Absolutely.
yeah, this idea that we just take and take and take and we never, I guess, give back. And I think it's important to give back, even if maybe it sounds selfish, but I think even for the believer, it's like giving back a bit of our creative and artistic talents is a form of worship.
Absolutely. I mean, you're kind of speaking my life's message right now. There are a lot of people who they sort of they discredit themselves because they think that they are not artistic. And so they tend to conflate the idea of being artistic with being creative. And they
Yeah.
think because I'm not artistic, therefore I am not creative. But the two are not one and the same.
Mhm.
It's like I am artistic and my creativity plays out in that way, and that works as a good, archetype in a sense, but everyone is creative. And whether you are just, whether you are cooking or doing a DIY project, whether you're an entrepreneur building a business, or a parent building a home and a family culture, in every single one of those settings, your creative capacity is at work. And when you are doing that, when your creative capacity is active within you, you're really leaning into the imago Dei, the image of God in you, and you're mimicking God, the ultimate creator.
So good. Yes. I love this conversation. I'm so glad we're having it. And shout out to my friend Matt Barnes. He was on Clear Intentions talking about production, labor, leisure. We were talking about the analog life. He is an artist. And it actually came to me when you were saying you don't have to just paint or draw to be an artist, because he was talking about how he's creative even in putting his outfit together in the morning. He was like, that is a thing for me to show my
Nice.
creative side. So sorry, Matt.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So all that to say, I want to talk about AI and what your
Mm.
personal thoughts are in regards to all of this art that I put in quotes. I don't know. I have my opinions. I'd love to hear your opinions.
Uh yeah, I mean
Talk about
AI art definitely. And
craft
look,
photography.
I'm not an abolitionist when it comes to every form of artificial intelligence. Obviously, I'm a modern man. I live in the technological age, and even the technology that we're using right now to have this conversation cross country and be able to share, worldwide effectively, is all wonderful, and it's a great day and age to live. And in fact, so much of my business is an online business, being able to share. And so in that sense, like, while I am, very much that old soul, I'm not, extremist when it comes to like doing away with technology. But I do believe that there are really important boundaries that need to be laid for us as we use our technology. And when it pertains specifically to AI art, that is one where I draw a really hard boundary, because I believe that my creativity, um, and is something that I want to grow and keep sacred. And so it's like, and there's a particular, you know, I think that's why AI art, especially of all the different, forms of AI being integrated into our lives, feels a little bit invasive, because we feel that you know art was always something that humans exclusively did. And GK Chesterton, in his book The Everlasting Man, says, dig far enough down in the earth and there you will find that man has drawn a picture of a reindeer. But no matter how deep you dig, you will never find that a reindeer has drawn a picture of a man, for art is the signature of man. There are many like industrious like creatures in our world, from the termite to the beaver, but there are none who create art for the sake of exemplifying beauty, of communicating an idea. And so that's where AI feels very invasive, because it's like it is your human capacity at work that is doing this exclusive thing, which is true creativity. And to pull back the curtain a little bit, you know, AI is not actually creating, it's recreating. It's putting things together. It's scraping the internet using lines of code, and following prompts in order to sort of um, do a bit of high-tech Pictionary, if you will. And so it's like, as an artist, I look at it and I'm like, okay, that's cute, but that's not at all what the art process is. That barely scratches the surface. And so I think that my hope is that this actually creates a very important conversation about the things that we truly value in art. Because just as J.R.R. Tolkien said, the thing that we love about a narrative is that it points to the existence of a narrator. Art is that bid for connection. It draws us into the individual who looked at something, found it beautiful, and decided to create it in their own way. And then, that draws into relationship in this common human experience. And so I think that, it's that relationship, it's that meaning that really undergirds true creation.
I'm a photographer, and there are perks of having Photoshop, AI now available in Photoshop. It was very helpful to remove some homes in the background of a shot and just kind of have trees there, and or the background just blends in a little bit better. So
Sure.
all that to say, I had a friend show me, she's a great photographer as well, and she was showing me this picture, and it was this big beautiful moon in the background. I was like, oh my gosh, how did you get that shot? And she's like, oh, that's fake. I pulled it in with AI, and then I maneuvered it to make sure that it looked natural. And I had no idea. I'm like, isn't that cheating? I want to be able to do that. But then we're all misled to think that you actually did that. But then there's a sense of, well, you were creative enough to want to put that moon there. So there is a bit of your creativity here, but it just feels, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I do think it's a slippery slope. And then it's like no one can keep up, or I guess we compare ourselves to something that isn't even real. It just was a frustrating thing.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, it is good to wrestle with that. And I do, from what I've seen thus far, especially with the rate that you're able to create, AI art, is it's going to, it's already had a little bit of an inflationary effect to its value, because it's like, you come by it so easy, and so it's like the value of it is low.
Yeah.
And so even though it is like the new kid on the block, in a sense, it still has to play by all the old rules. And one of the old rules that was sort of identified by John Ruskin, he was like the greatest art critic of the Victorian era. And so he said something that I think is like very pointed, even though he said it, couple hundred years ago. It's rather pointed for AI today. He says, that which is quickly made will quickly fade, but that which takes a long time to create is sure to last long into the future. And I think that still holds true. It's like, if it is quickly made, then it's like where's the sacrifice? Where is the time, where is the labor, where is the thought process put into that? And that's where it's very interesting. At the same time, you're seeing this massive acceleration in AI art and all of this super technological these super technological tools that are being applied to art making. You also have this renaissance of a lot of old art forms. It's like blacksmithing is like on the rise right now, and there are a lot of people who are creating like art knives, art swords. One of my best friends is a blacksmith, and he's creating these unbelievable swords, daggers, knives, using a process that goes back to like the Bronze Age.
Oh, wow.
Um, and then, you see like hand engraving. Hand engraving had like faded away for a long time, but now there's a massive uprising of all these people who are doing this like true, beautiful style of hand engraving as well. And the same thing with calligraphy. Being a master penman, I've especially seen this like this real yearning. I think, the digital has grown dead to our eyes,
Yeah.
and there's something that is just incredibly true and authentic, and has in it so much more meaning because it was done by the human hand.
Yeah, it's very rich. I feel like we just kind of dove in really deep, and this conversation is so meaty, which I love. But I wanted to know a little bit more about you. And did you ever think that you were going to be an artist? Did you see this being your life's trajectory?
There was inklings along the way, but I kind of always I pushed them off,
Mm.
and I talk about that a lot in the book. Like I got many accolades through high school, even won some national art awards, and my art teachers, they said, Jake, you're more skilled than we are to teach you, so we're just going to treat this as like an independent study. You tell us what you want to make, and then we'll just grade you at the end of the year. And they were always like imploring me, like, you've got to go for this, like you've got to become an artist full time. And I was like, no. I said, I just, I didn't want to live the life of a starving artist, and I didn't want to like um I was really worried. I was, warned by a lot of people, that said, if you make your passion your work, and then that's the fastest way of just smothering it. And so it was like, which is not, there are times where it's like I've had some hard times in my career where I have had that, where it's like people say like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
Well, as it turns out, if anything that you do as work eventually feels like work after a while, especially if, it's like there's deadlines, and, you're having to make bills by the end of the month, it's like then it does feel like work, and there's an opportunity for the joy, for that sacred element to get kind of sucked out of it. But my wife and I kind of coined this phrase, we call it the holy hustle, where it's like creating artwork for me is beautiful and sacred. And when it's done in the studio, it's like it feels like holy ground. But then, you know, as soon as it leaves my door, it has to become a product. I have to be able to put a price tag on it. I have to be able to sell it online. And that all feels so, it feels like it contaminates this process. But
Yeah.
it's kind of it's similar to like parenting in a way. It's like you pour your best into your art pieces. You intend the most for them, but eventually they have to go out into the world and get a job.
Yeah, I think it's the deadlines for me because I started this podcast as a creative project as well. And then it just continued to grow because I was consistent. But I have this little rebellious nature every day before I hit publish. It's like, oh, was it going to get done? And it's just like, this isn't when you don't have the deadlines and people, I guess, expecting or now that I monetize, like you have people expecting you to advertise their products. So yeah, I don't know. It doesn't make it not enjoyable, but I hear what you're saying.
Right.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about calligraphy, woodwork, and what was the other skill that you have? And is that normal to be able to do all of those things well?
Uh, no, I mean, I work, yeah, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. So I do like, you know, drawing was my first love. That's where I started. So realistic drawing with charcoal and pencil, and I used to do many different styles of painting. I've done, acrylic and airbrush and gouache. But now I'm almost exclusively, painting in oil. There's just something that's so amazing. Of course, it's the older of the painting methods, but it has like such a beautiful effect because of the way that the luminosity of the paint plays through the layers. So I paint in oil, and then I sculpt as well. And mainly, like, I've done clay sculptures that I've turned to bronze, but I love to carve. And so I carve a lot in wood, and a lot of times those will get molded and turned into bronze pieces. I've carved in like wood, bone, antler, and then calligraphy sort of became my special sauce because I pursued my certificate as a master penman, and now there's only 9 of us in the world with that designation. And so it's a very, very old world, very, wonderful art form. But I'm, always finding ways of bringing, the written word or calligraphic flourishing, which is like beautiful line work that stems from that calligraphy, into my paintings, drawings, and even sculpture.
Cool. I guess we've given the listeners quite a bit to think on here, but what is the biggest takeaway you want listeners slash readers to take after reading your book? If there's one thing you feel in them.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I hope that they take away is to lean into that creativity that God has given them, and that in so doing, you'll find, deeper, like, well trodden way back to relationship with God. And not only will you find a place where it's like you enter into flow where hours melt away like minutes, but you're going to be brought in communion with your Father. And that is just, that makes the whole experience all the more rich and enlightening, that it's something that not only, transforms your state of mind, and the things that you create, but it transforms your soul. And so that's my great charge for the reader. And it's something that I hope that by the time they reach the end of the book, that they take up and do themselves.
Great. Well, Jake, where can listeners find you online and grab a copy of your book?
Yeah, you can pick up a copy of my book pretty much anywhere books are sold. We are now offering signed copies exclusively through my website, which is Jake Weidmann. Weidmann is spelled Weidmann. That's jakeweidmann.com. And on there, you can see my whole online gallery. There's links to different videos that we've produced showing the creation process behind many of my pieces, as well as links to all of our social media channels, which are chronicling a lot of my, real-time work on the current projects that I have.
Great. Well, as we wrap things up here, I'm going to ask you the final question that I ask all my guests, and it is, what does it mean to you to live a life with clear intentions?
To live a life with clear intentions, that is a great question. I think, letting your faith, I think just being rooted in your faith is the best way that you can do that. Keeping first things first, as C.S. Lewis used to say, then second things will flourish. And so I think, as long as you order your life in that way, that you keep God first, and, you make your marriage, you make your family a priority in your life before you pursue anything else, then that leads to the greatest fulfillment and authenticity. The rest is just chasing after the wind.
So good. Well, Jake, thank you so much. This was such a rich conversation. I'm so grateful for it. I love that it was aligned with what I've been talking about and thinking about recently. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm glad it worked out. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.